There are hundreds of audio compressors, some great, some you might use once or twice before moving on to a different one. But the ones on this list are what I consider to be the best audio compressor plugins. These are the ones I return to time and time again, and the ones I always recommend to people when they're looking for new plugins. Now keep in mind, these are just my personal opinions. None of these are placements or sponsors. Also, let me know in the comments which ones are your favorites. That said, let's cover the 4 best audio compressors. At number 4, we have Pro C2 by FabFilter. So this compressor feels like a jack of all trades, but master of none. It's not going to give you the best optical compression or 1176 emulation, but it's flexible enough to get good results. Of all the algorithms or modes, the standouts include Clean, which is great for general compression when you want to quickly affect dynamics. Then Vocal is perfect for quickly bringing vocals to the forefront of a mix. When combined with a little look ahead and auto makeup gain, this setting just about instantly sits the vocal on top of the mix while increasing low-level details. Lastly, the mastering option is perfect for controlling both peaks and RMS level of a stereo mix. The distortion is incredibly low, so if you keep the amount of attenuation under a couple of dB, you're not going to notice any change in the timbre, just more controlled dynamics. This is also the compressor that I go to for sidechaining or ducking. The internal-external sidechain, combined with its basic EQ feature, helps a lot with controlling the behavior of any triggered compression. The same could be said for the various modes. For example, if I use this compressor on an auxiliary reverb send and I use the dry signal as the trigger to duck the reverb, switching between the modes or algorithms makes finding the right compression behavior a lot easier. Lastly, this is my favorite compressor for parallel compression. Since I have control of the mix and the individual dry signal, it's easy to dial in the compressed signal without setting up a send. So, even though it's not the best sounding compressor for any particular task, it's probably the most flexible and practical on this list. Let's take a listen to the plugin applying aggressive compression, then I'll vary the wet-dry to introduce parallel compression. At number 3, we have Omnipressor by Eventide. So when I first used this compressor, I had trouble figuring out what to use it for. It seemed like one of those plugins you try, but then you don't use after the initial demo. However, I kept coming back to it, and once I got the hang of the controls, I found I use it on almost every mix, and sometimes even a master. The plugin does 4 things really well. First, it amplifies quieter aspects of the signal. Even without enabling any of the other processing, notice how aggressively it amplifies quieter details. By combining this with gradual soft knee protection near the peak, it's behaving like a soft knee saturator with a fair amount of input gain. Secondly, it introduces a fair amount of harmonic distortion. This alters the timbre and it provides a mildly distorted sound that adds complexity to a signal. But the push-pull of the compression-expansion effect is by far the most enjoyable aspect of the plugin. Even with a very subtle ratio and small attenuation and amplification ranges, the signal can be controlled significantly. Granted, you need to be careful with the threshold and pay more attention to the levels than with a traditional compressor. However, the end result with the beneficial harmonics and low-level amplification is better sounding than most compressors, and it controls dynamics without the need for aggressive peak-down compression. So, let's listen to the processor. Notice that the attenuation and amplification is subtle, but that the dynamics are impressively controlled. Real quick, Sage Audio is an analog mastering service. We've been around for 20 years, and mastering starts at $49 per track. There's a link in the description, and then there's an ad at the end of the video if you want to learn more. At number 2, we have Weiss DS1 Mark III. So let me start by saying that this is not an easy compressor to control. It takes a while, and reading the manual a few times to get the hang of it. And even then, I find that I'm still learning new ways to process with it after using it for a couple of years. Also, even if you've had this plugin for a while, I'd recommend reading the original hardware units manual. Softtube's manual for the plugin doesn't go into too much depth, whereas the hardware units manual from Weiss is going to tell you everything that you need to know and more. For example, in the manual, you'll find a lot of info about the attack and release settings. Getting a better understanding of the fast, average, and slow release settings is crucial to controlling the compressor's behavior or understanding why it's behaving the way it is. The fast release is for peaks, the slow is for RMS, and the average determines the length of time the compressor considers peak or RMS. By varying the average, how the peak material of the signal is compressed changes greatly. Another useful bit of info is how the max gain setting works. If we were to pull up the graphic from the manual, we can see that the ratio, threshold, and knee play a large role in how the signal could be maximized post-compression. For example, if I use a soft knee with a high ratio and then select makeup gain, the peak will hit 0 dB, but more importantly, the shape of the dynamic change will now be amplified in tandem. Once you get the hang of controlling dynamics enough by varying your attack and release settings to enable the max gain feature without clipping, the compressor really starts to show its value. It allows for highly customizable maximization of the signal into a ceiling. Now, functionality aside, the compressor has an incredibly distinct sound. Even though it's touted as transparent, I think it actually has one of the more pronounced timbres of any compressor I've used. The distortion is aggressive but not overbearing. How it shapes transients sounds surgically precise, but the plugin adds an undeniable polish and sheen that's hard to explain or find an underlying reason for. Lastly, the purchase of the compressor comes with additional units that's based on the compressor. These include the maximizer, de-esser, and limiter, all of which use the processing of the Mark III just with a stripped-down user interface. I find the de-esser to be one of the best sounding, if not the best sounding ways to control sibilants. It's not as transparent as FFT editing or as smooth as maybe FabFilter's de-esser with its aggressive look ahead, but it adds an undeniably enjoyable character to an otherwise harsh part of the frequency spectrum. And the flexibility that's available in the settings window offers some of the complexity and nuance of the original unit. So if you can't tell, I highly recommend this plugin. It's in second place for me due to the aggressive learning curve and the sometimes difficult to control UI. But again, once you spend time with it, you'll likely use it on the majority of your projects. So let's take a listen to it and notice how it offers a really distinct timbre. Last up, we have Presswork by Yuhi. So if you've watched this channel before, you know I use this plugin all the time. Whenever I want to demonstrate a unique compression technique or a plugin feature, Presswork seems to be the only option more times than not. Like the DS1 Mark III, the compressor is definitely complex. However, I found its user interface to be a lot more responsive. Additionally, instead of a simplified version of the compressor that's distributed as separate units, Presswork includes these stripped-down versions as different views within the plugin. So if I want the sound of the compressor, but with settings optimized for a particular instrument or a specific purpose, these views expedite the mixing process a good amount. And if you want more control over a particular setting, these views act like a preset, meaning you can go back to the main window and adjust the parameters set by this simplified version. This plugin also offers a highly distinct timbre. However, I found it to be versatile enough to achieve just about any timbre. In that way, it's a lot like the Pro C2 with its multiple modes. It takes a little more work to achieve the sound of a particular processor, but once you do, it's a vast improvement over the Pro C2. Some of my favorite functions include this mix of feedback and feed-forward detection, dual phase rotation, which softens the highs through dynamic masking, and separate mid and side detection paired with automatic makeup gain. This makes it a fantastic way to dynamically control the stereo width of a signal, either by compressing the mid and not the side, or by compressing the side and using makeup gain. Also, like the DS1 Mark III, we get adaptive release and controllable RMS detection, but in an easier to control way. Lastly, and simply put, it sounds good. It doesn't matter how I use it, whether it's for subtle bus processing, moderate vocal compression, or for an aggressive creative effect, there hasn't been a single time that I thought, this isn't the right compressor. Instead, I always find a way to tweak it to accomplish exactly what I'm looking for. So let's take a listen to it. I'll switch through some of the presets so we can quickly hear it run through wildly different settings. Get professional analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy award-winning artist Tulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating masters that don't accurately translate what you hear in your head when you could instantly fix a problem by clicking the link in the description and working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do? We've mastered thousands of songs that accurately translate what each client hears in their head, and it'll work for you too. Click the link in the description now and get direct access to us for personalized analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head.